he's looking at the other window. So when I turn and look at that window, it's 3 feet away from the end of the shotgun at the most.
Okay.
And that's when we see this thing's face in the window. And the first thing that caught my attention was the eyes were like black translucent marbles.
The Codega is a guide and a storyteller, escorting you through the night, lighting the way, warding off thieves, ghosts, demons, and other oddities. Along the journey, his companions would often share with him the most curious of stories that he'd record in his Codex. Perhaps you just might find yourself traveling with the Codega and sharing one of yours.
Here's a chilling tale about a guy who disappeared in the Alaska wilderness back in the 50s. It's a weird one. This happened in 1956 near a little village called Ruby, right along the Yukon River. There was this trapper, Thomas, who knew the land like the back of his hand. He set out on what should have been just a regular hunting trip, but he never came back. After a few days, people got worried and put together a search party. When they found his campsite, everything looked normal. His tent was still standing, nothing ransacked, but then they started to notice some things that were really strange. Massive footprints, way too big to be human, surrounded his tents. And his traps completely smashed, like someone wanted to make sure he wasn't catching anything. But the craziest part, his rifle was snapped in half. I mean, think about how strong you have to be to do that. There were no signs of Thomas, no tracks leading away, no clues, nothing. Just those footprints and the wreckage. To this day, people in Ruby still talk about what happened. Some say he wandered into the territory of the hairy man, Alaska's own Bigfoot. There are hundreds of these reports or of these creatures out there in the deep forests and mountain ridges. Did Thomas cross paths with something he shouldn't have? Did he stumble into the hunting grounds? I don't know, but whatever happened out there, it wasn't anything normal. And that's where I come in. I'm Rye the Codega, here to shine the light on those not normal mysteries and bring them into the light. So together we can work towards uncovering the truth. And if you have any experiences you want to share them at codexofcuriosities@gmail.com. That's codexofcuriosities@gmail.com. Now, speaking of not normal and mysteries in the Alaska wilderness, tonight we're jumping right into that puzzle, that of the hairy man, Sasquatch, Bigfoot, wood booger, whatever you want to call it. My guest, Fred Roehl, has dedicated himself to preserving the stories and encounters shared by Alaskans about this creature, from chilling howls and the strange unexplained disappearances as well. Fred has made it his mission to uncover the truth and help others navigate the rugged and remote wilderness of Alaska. And aware of all the dangers, the real dangers. Now, I not only, I know that Fred doesn't just document these, but he's had his own stories as well. So let's get comfortable, settle in, and join me as we head into the heart of Alaska with Fred as our guide. All right, let's get into it and invite Fred to the Codega's Codex of Curiosities. Fred, welcome, and I'm glad to have you here.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Something I wanted to let me start by. I'm Fred Roehl. I'm from Bristol Bay, Alaska. I'm Alaska Native. I'm a Curyung Tribal Council member, and I was raised with the knowledge of these beings and whatnot. From our oral history, our oral tradition. And one thing I want to add about that, the oral tradition, a lot of academic types want to consider it and put it in a box of folklore and mythology. And one thing they overlook is the fact that that oral history is what keeps us alive. That's why we're still here today. It's not wasted words. We don't have campfire stories or bedtime stories. It is to keep us safe and keep us aware of our surroundings. So I just wanted to add that in there. And also Ruby, Alaska. I've actually been there, and this was before the channel and before I started this whole thing. But when I was there, I was from Ruby. There's like a 60-mile long cat cut road to mining camps, and one of them was near Long, Alaska, a abandoned town now, but it was around for the gold boom in the time. Well, I kept feeling watched at that place. I was out on this gravel pad and I was building these 2 10 by 20-foot bunk houses with a, separation in the middle and 2 bunks on each side for the crew. So I was working on that and I kept feeling like the feeling of being watched. And I know that feeling all too well to dismiss it. So when the guys came back up from their mining, duties and whatnot, I asked the 2 local guys, the native guys, I was like, hey, what's going on, with the hairy man around here? And one of them got quiet and walked away, and the other one was like, I don't know. And so I was like, okay. So the guy that walked away a little while later, I pulled him aside when we were alone, and I said, what's going on? I know when I'm being watched, and I know all about the hairy man. And he was like, I don't know. And so I just, no pressure, but he shared his encounter later, and it's I think it's titled "Shots Fired in Ruby, Alaska," and it's amazing how many of these encounters happen that will never see the light of day as far as the outside world. There is a very large or very strong superstitious aspect to it that it's really hard to get past. It truly is, and it makes my work that much harder. But you know, one step at a time, right?
I agree. I agree, and this is something that I tell a lot of people. I said that like our stories have kind of, that is how we used to pass on our history. That was how we passed on our history, was telling these stories. They weren't, like you said, they're not just campfire tales or ghost stories or something like that. There was truth there. There were lessons for us to learn there, so to keep us alive, exactly like you said. And that's one thing that I want to do, is continue that tradition of keeping these stories, and passing on these stories as a word of like wisdom and advice and caution as well.
Right. And you're doing something that's, I mean, almost identical to what I'm doing. I'm just preserving what I'm able to gather in uh, that essence of the oral tradition. That's why when I share an encounter, it's here's who it happened to, here's where it was, and here's what happened, and I leave it at that. I try not to add anything more, and just leave it for what it is as a modern oral history, and that's why I present it the way I do. And
And I think that's fantastic. And would you be able to tell our listeners and viewers exactly where to find those ones as well, Fred?
Subarctic Alaska Sasquatch is the YouTube title or YouTube channel, and also subarcticalaskasasquatch.com. I have an interactive map of Alaska where they can zoom into an area, hit one of the marker pins, and it's embedded with the YouTube channel, so they could go right to the encounter video that the corresponding video that relates to that area.
Yeah,
And
it's
that's
fantastic. It's sorry. I was
yeah,
going to
no
say
problem.
it's fantastic. I've played around with it a little bit, and it's a fantastic website. And that map is amazing. You scroll around and you can see where there's multiple sightings, and like you said, you've linked it to each one of the actual shows that it pertains to, which is no one could ask for more. Like, you're doing an amazing record keeping job.
Right. And that's thanks to my tech guy, because I'm not a tech guy. But Dave, the tech guy, man, my hat's off to him. I told him, my brainchild, and he brought it, to where it is now. But yeah, just it's one of the main purposes is for people potentially going to those areas, being more aware. And it's not to scare anyone away. It's so they have more knowledge. So let's say they hear a weird owl hoot that's not natural, or a whistle, or rocks are being thrown. They can have foreknowledge of, hey, wait, this might be leading to something I don't want no part of, and get out of there before, potential bad stuff happens. And yeah, that's the main purpose, is public safety, because I've seen the other side of the coin. And, speaking of seeing that other side of the coin, one of my main driving factors is up until 2006, I would have said, hey, they make noise, they're real, they make noise, but you leave and it's all good. And, you know, even though I heard all the stories from my elders about they will steal you and eat you, I took it serious. However, I didn't have much to put stock into that fully until 2006. So we were up on the Nuyakuk River, which is the largest tributary to the Nushagak River over there in Bristol Bay from Dillingham going up to Nushagak. And the whole purpose of us being there, I was with one of my elders and my cousin, and we were going up there to gold prospect. I mean, we were two worker bees working for the elder. He set up all the arrangements, and we ended up at this little, like, it was an abandoned salmon counting tower. And what that is back in the day before LiDAR and all this, modern stuff, they would literally climb a tower and count the salmon as they went by, which I don't have the patience for that. I would rather be out there with a fishing pole. But anyway, so this little, I mean, it was basically a shack, a glorified box. It was 2x4 construction with 5/8 plywood. It was 8 foot wide, 8 foot long, and 8 foot square all around. The back side of it had this little 50 style trailer to it. And they must have chopped it off and it was MacGyvered, and that was all. The windows were boarded up and it was blacked out because Land of the Midnight Sun, it was for the bunkhouse so they could actually get some sleep. And when it's right off the bank, it's on a high bank. And so when we get there, we're just worker bees. We unloaded everything that was pertinent out of the skiff and up into this shack. And while we were doing that, my elder was making us salmon stew, or you could call it salmon chowder, whichever, same thing. And we were basically just doing what we were told. We weren't there disrespecting anything. We weren't whooping it up, drinking, or, shooting guns or anything like that. So when we get in there, we eat and all that. And they started playing cribbage. And I was standing there. I had this brand new custom 870 Remington pump action shotgun. It was going to be my brush gun, stainless, because of the conditions I lived in is a lot of water, right? So it was marine grade, and
Nice.
on the way
Yeah,
up,
it's nice gun. Yes.
very nice, very, very nice. It was custom, but on the way up river, I had tried to shoot a couple ducks to, supplement the, you know, the menu, so to speak, and it was off. And so while they were playing cribbage, and I was standing there, I was adjusting that ghost ring sight because in the back it was real small screwdriver, almost the kind for glasses. And so while I was messing with that, it was about a half hour after dark, and the whole place just went. It was a creak, like a heavy wind just pushed up against the place, which there was no wind because this place was so janky. It would have been obvious if the wind was blowing, right? So when I turned and we were all looking at each other, I noticed where my cousin was sitting, right behind him was one of these windows, and there's one on each side of this place, and they were 18 inches tall, 24 inches wide. Over his shoulder, between the top of his shoulder and the top of the window, I saw something move, but it was all obscured. I just saw darkness move, right? And so soon bear. The look on my face kind of shocked my cousin because he jumped up and said, "Hey, that ain't funny." And I told him, "No, it's probably a bear behind you. I saw it move." So he grabbed 30-06, and I had that shotgun. We grabbed this million candle watt powered spotlights, right? Old school stuff. And this place, when I say janky, I mean janky. The doorknob was just a little J hook with an eyelet. That was it. So we pushed it open, and I hit the beam to the riverbank side, which was just right outside the door, basically, not far at all. And we start panning, and we take one step out of the door, of course. And as I'm panning, we make it over to where the tree line is, off maybe 50 yards at the most. And once I reached a certain point, all of a sudden, 3 sets of eye shine are coming back at us, real bright, real big. It was like fence post markers, right? And immediately we saw what was
And
going on.
and
It was
sorry,
clearly,
what height? What height were these eyes at? These eye shine.
oh, at least 12 foot, minimum of 12 foot, minimum,
Okay.
which
Okay.
was shocking in and of itself. But typically in past things, you shine a flashlight at them, they try to hide their eye shine. They try to, obscure their, where they're at. These ones were just standing there. It was really spooky. We stepped right back in the door. I hit the little J hook, Now, when I shut the door and I hit the little J hook and I dropped the spotlight on the ground, this pressure, it was like constant. It was like the feeling of your ears haven't popped yet when from an airplane flight. So the person who's talking sounds like they're talking from a jar at a distance, even though they're right next to you, kind of thing.
So,
And
so it was like something like was muffling the whole area, like it was kind of in
yeah,
this.
it was just a constant pressure. It didn't vary at all. It was just a constant. And it wasn't really noticeable at first because, like, what the hell is going on? So
Yes, your adrenaline is pumping.
yeah. And I'm telling my uncle, hey, there's hairy man out there. There's three of them. And I'm asking my cousin, you saw it, right? Because I was making sure I wasn't just freaking out for nothing. Well, he didn't even get a chance to talk. He's standing off my left hand shoulder. And again, we're in a very small space, 8 foot square. It wasn't all that big. And at this point, I'm holding the shotgun. I had that pistol grip of it in my left hand, kind of offhanded, and I'm just holding it. He had this 30-06 on the ground. The buttstock was on the ground. He was holding onto the barrel, kind of like an oar. And all of a sudden, I mean, in a flash, he was underneath the table, little card table they were playing cribbage on. And there was a Coleman lantern that we were using for light source hanging right above it on a hook. And it happened so quick and it was so out of character for him. So we're looking down at him and it looks like he's having a seizure. He's seized up and he's looking like just one direction only. And so I look at my elder and I'm like, we kind of give each other the same look of what the hell. We look back down at him and we notice he's looking at the other window. So when I turn and look at that window, it's 3 feet away from the end of the shotgun at the most. And that's when we see this thing's face in the window. And the first thing that caught my attention was the eyes were like black translucent marbles, just big. They're about a foot apart. We saw from the bottom of the nose to the top of the eyebrow. And it was looking down at my cousin. And the face, it was like an ashen gray, like a couple shades darker than wet cement, real wrinkly, real super wrinkly. It looked real weathered and ancient looking. You know what I mean? But, uh, you know, one of the things that because all this is happening way faster than I'm explaining it. So it went from looking down at my cousin and it turned and looked at me and furrowed its brow. And in those milliseconds when that's happened, I immediately knew I was food. There was no doubt. It was like that primal thing I believe we all have was triggered within me. And I knew I was food. It wasn't mind speak. It was none of that. The energy was all your food. And it gave me that glare and it started moving out of, in front of the window. And it wasn't like a conscious thought, oh, I got to shoot. I got to protect myself. It was just autopilot. And I shot 3 times through the wall right there. And because of that muffled feeling, it was more like a thump, thump, thump from a 12 gauge. Okay, these are slugs. They were,
And you're talking in a room that is 8 feet. It's like
yeah,
I
yes.
that should be echoing. That should be like deafening.
Wee, you shouldn't be hearing anything
Exactly.
other than a whining, high pitched squeal. But it was just thump, thump, thump. There was a loud scream that reverberated through the whole place, and it almost simultaneously the whole place shifted. It almost took me off my feet. I thought we were gonna go for a ride into the river, man, because how quickly and hard it shifted. Um, and something to understand is why it shifted that way is there's no permanent structures allowed on state land. So this thing was built up on skids basically underneath it. And so that's why if there was like on pilings or anything like that, it probably would have broke off, but it just basically slid a couple feet. Well, that scream, um, you felt it reverberate through your body. And it was so intense. And again, that muffling sound was going on. So it was probably far louder than I even realized. But the pot that the stew was in, when that scream stopped, it continued ringing like a tuning fork because of the resonance. Just, because it was a stainless steel pot. And immediately my elder is back in that little bunkhouse area where, that 50 style trailer where, it was, he was back in there, and I'm freaking out, man. I didn't know what to do because it all happened so fast. And, I shoot through the wall and the place shifts, and then it's dead quiet. And it was like I was there alone because my cousin was in no condition at all. He was still seized up. I tried to grab the 30-06 from him, but he had a death grip on it, and the gun's loaded. I didn't want an accident, so I just kind of left it alone. He had wet himself. And so what I did was the two chairs, I took one and put it next to the door for whatever reason. It was whatever. Turned the other one and set the back of it towards the opening to that little cubby, and I sat there so I could see both windows. And I was shaking so hard, and gripping that shotgun so hard. Even to this day, every once in a while, my hands will just cramp up if I'm holding them like a something smaller than a soda can for too long. It'll just want to cramp up, because I
Gotcha.
literally,
Like a flashlight or something. Yeah.
yeah, anything like that, because I had such a death grip on it. My hand hurt. I would have to physically let go and get feeling back into my hand because of how hard I was holding it. And, I sat there, in essence, because my elder wasn't responding to me. I was like, what do we do? You know, uh, Basically looking for his guidance. What do we do? I just shot this thing, and what the hell's going on? Because at that point, everything was out the window as far as my perception of how these things act. So,
Exactly.
yeah, and so I literally sat there it was so hard to when I had to pump that Coleman lantern because it was a white gas kind, you had to pump it. Um, Whenever I would have to do that, it was so hard. I was so freaked out. It was so hard to let go of the shotgun to pump it, even though I wanted the light, but yet it was like really, really hard to let go of the gun. So sitting there, the only thing and the only reason I stopped shaking, because I was really like shaking real hard, was I resigned myself to death. I was like, you know what? We're dead. Like, we're dead. And once I was able to, and trust me, it wasn't something I was just like, okay, you're dead. That wasn't it. It was it was not easy to accept. But once I had that mindset, I stopped shaking so hard. Don't get me wrong, I was still freaked the fuck out, man. And I was able to think more clearly and try to, like, I started engaging my elder again. I was like, hey, we need to get out of here. The skiff's right there. There's about 20 feet of trail, and it drops down to the bank, and it's about 6-7 foot drop, and it was pretty steep, and the little landing there is where the skiff was, and all we needed to do was get there, and that 20 something feet seemed like 10 miles at the time because of, the intensity of what was going on. So as I was sitting there, and as I sat there, it was more than a handful of hours, rough, give or take. But when a moth would hit the window, I can't count the times that any little noise that I almost Swiss cheesed everything in there. I sat there with thoughts of how they were going to get me. And I was like, I'm going to save one shot. And it wasn't for myself. It was for when one of these things got close enough, I could shoot it in the nostril or in the eye or something like that. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Make
well,
it count almost, in a way.
exactly. Go with my boots on. And as I'm sitting there after that handful of hours or so, my cousin started talking, but it was gibberish shit at first. And so I started engaging him and trying to bring him, to what was going on. That took a few. Again, I wasn't watching a clock. You know what I mean? It was all white knuckle terror. So I told him, I said, hey, it's okay. I shot it. It ran away. We're okay. I didn't know, but I was trying to, get him off the floor. So once he did come back, so to speak, we got him changed out. I'm talking to him. And when I asked him, did you see what I saw? And he was like, at first it was hard for him to say it. But when he said it, he was like, yeah, I saw the 3 sets of eye shine. And I said, well, what happened? Why'd you fall under the table? And he said that when because where he had a different position looking out that window, he was just looking. He said it showed its teeth to him before, and that's what caused him and freak out and fall under the table. And when he said when he fell under the table, that's when it came from where it was initially, closer to the window, and was looking down at him. And then that's when we turned and seen it. He said it had big block teeth, and he said it looked like a real sinister smile, versus like a regular smile, that type of thing. And so we started talking about getting to the boat. We started talking about getting our escape plan going, and it was really hard to because we were in such a compromised position. Like, I knew my cousin wasn't 100%, and my elder was not engaging me in anything. When he did engage in conversation, it was unrelated to what we were dealing with. It was like fish prices for that year, total poundage, like irrelevant stuff, right?
Yeah,
So,
he's kind of like almost checked out. He's like, I don't want anything to do with this, and my mind is off in something else.
right, unwilling to kind of accept current circumstances, kind of thing, and it's not a shot at him. Everyone
No,
has their own way.
it's like a survival mechanism almost of sorts.
Yeah, exactly. And so we get our game plan that we're gonna get to the skiff and get out of there, but it's dark. It's pitch black out, and river traveling in the dark is very, very dangerous. There could be a floating log you can run into, capsize, all sorts of different stuff. So, we're contemplating getting to the skiff and then drifting, letting the current take us, down to the Nushagak River. And as we're making these plans and stuff, my cousin's like, we got to make sure they're not close. We got to make sure they're not waiting right outside the door, because in 2020 hindsight, when the place went and creaked, I feel looking back on it, we were lured out. And once we were lured out, we avoided the ambush that was set for us because we saw the other ones there and ducked back inside. And then I shot through the wall. You know what I mean? So I think that changed whatever plan was going on.
Whatever trap they set.
Exactly. Because had we not seen the eye shine, we would have walked right around that corner to the one standing there. And so we have our game plan initially. Our initial game plan was get to the skiff and drift downriver, and just drift out of there because the river is moving fast enough that we could just drift away. That was the initial plan, and we're talking about it. And he, let's check to make sure there's nothing out there. So we had to kill the lantern because of the mirror effect. So dark outside, it was like the windows were like a mirror. So we beam out on the riverbank side, and we see nothing. And believe me, we were looking. We were looking, and we saw nothing. So we went to the other side where it was just outside the window, and we saw the eyes shine on that same side. And we start, further up, and then we pan back the same area. We saw the 3 sets of eye shine, and there was nothing. And as we panned back off the backhand corner of this place, kind of, a kitty corner or whatever, like a 45-degree angle off of it, maybe not that far, there was an old outhouse that was 8 foot, maybe 8.5 foot tall. If no one's used it in forever, but that part of that structure was still there and it was still standing. And once we reached there with that, we had a brand new battery in this 1,000,000 candlewatt power spotlight. It, for what it was at the time, it was bright as shit. But once the beam got there, we saw this huge black nothingness. We could see the silhouette. It was humanoid shaped. It was, it was what the size was one thing. It was hulking, 5.5 foot wide, 13, 14 foot tall at least, because where the angle we were seeing it, the top of that outhouse roof was at least 8.5 foot tall. And it was roughly right here on this thing's chest as far as size wise. And it wasn't immediately up on it. It was offset back behind it just a bit. But the spotlight, it absorbed the light. This thing was so black, it was absorbing the light. It gave no eye shine, no sheen to the black hair, if that's what it was. It was a big black nothingness. And that was scarier than its size. It was like that big black nothing was there for us.
Yeah.
Immediately.
Yeah, it was just like sucking in the light. And not to take away from your story there, Fred, but I've had an experience like that as well, where I've seen something where it was blacker than black. It wasn't like I was shining a light on it, but it was, you're in darkness, but this is just pulling any type of light into it, and it's just darker than dark. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was scarier than its size, because everything gives back something. Even the blackest black bear will have sheen to its fur. You know what I mean? There's always something that comes back. But anyway, so immediately we kill that spotlight and we're tucked back into that cubby, all of us. And we are freaking out, man. We have barrels crossed. We're all saying different things at the same time. It is really chaotic, but there's no noise. It's all dead quiet. And so after our freak out, we start quieting down and we're sitting there quiet. And I would guess maybe close to an hour of quietness. And as it stayed quiet, we calmed down. We were able to calm down. We didn't hear anything. And then as we start discussing getting it, really putting thought into, we got to get the fuck out of here, man. Like there's way more going on than, we need to go. The urgency just really went up. Not that it wasn't freaking up there already. So we start discussing our plan again, and we start hearing this noise, and it sounded like helicopter rotor wash, that thump, 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 thump sound. And then we started feeling it in the ground, and it was in the near distance that we heard it. So it was weird because it was like, what the hell? Because it wasn't adding up. And then we started feeling it in the ground. And what it was is one of these things ran by on the outside, and we could feel it shaking the ground because of its weight. And, as soon as that happened, they must have been staged around or something, because a bunch of them, the ones that were out there, in the moment, it wasn't a bunch. It was maybe 4 or 5 at the most or whatever, but you could hear them running around outside of the shack, and you could feel the different, how the ground shook, and you could tell some weighed more than others just by the way that the ground shook when they were running around. And they ran around a little bit, and then it was like they backed off, and then they would do it again, and then they backed off. And after the second time, or during that second time they were doing that, we could hear one of them sniffing the outside of that little trailer we were in, the backside that was attached to the shack. To this day, I still can't even let my dog sniff near me, by my ear. That's just too much. But
It's like a
anyway,
trigger.
so yeah. And when they were running around, I kept expecting them, man, to smash the place down. I figured they were trying to confuse us, and then they're just gonna smash the place down and snatch us up, right? So okay, we're right back to freaking out, barrels crossed, just chaotic. And that went on for about, because I was so terrified, I couldn't give an exact time, but I would guess about 10, 15 minutes maybe. And it was all intervals of these things running around for a bit and then backing off. And again, I'm assuming they backed off because that's what it felt like, when you're feeling the trembling in the ground. It got quiet again. And so we calmed down because of it being quiet, and we re-engaged our plan to get the hell out of there. Now, one of the obstacles we had is that our 22-foot boat, our line was long because it was used for part of the commercial operations, and it needed a long anchor line for being in tidal water that can change, in depth. And so it was about 60-foot long ish, somewhere in that range. And we had drug it all the way out into the tundra and dug it in. So we're tethered off, we're tied off. The first 10, 12 feet of it is chain, and then it's regular rope. And so I told my cousin, I was like, here's my pocket knife. You'll go first, cut that line. We got to have that line cut, and you start the boat. I'll help our elder. And so we got our game plan down. It was just the first hints of light change outside, which was, again, something that gave us a little more encouragement because we knew daylight was going to be coming in the near future, right? So the first time we got in front of the door ready to make our move, excuse me, we're standing there, and just as we're about to make a go of it, we hear it sounded like someone shooting a pellet gun at the place. It's a stack sound. and the cadence increased until it was like a hailstorm, and we were right back into that cubby. So it, later realized it was rocks they were throwing, but so it was like right then when we tucked back into the cubby, I was feeling upset, like toyed with. I felt like they were toying with us because I viewed it as they're big enough, they could have smashed that place, smacked me against a tree at their whim. And it felt like we were being toyed with. So I was getting upset. And so it was the kind of upset where you wanted to just run out and say, let's do it, quit playing games kind of thing. But I
Yeah,
didn't.
like let's yeah, I
Yeah,
understand. It's enough is
right.
enough.
Yeah. If you're gonna get me, you're gonna get me. Let's do it. But so we calmed down after a while. And during that time frame when we were tucked back in the cubby and freaking out, it got light enough. And as we calmed down, the lighter it got, the more encouragement, we had. And it was to the point of being light enough to where I could easily see that tree line behind us that was about 50-ish yards away, right? And that's the inside. And then the outside, we could easily see across the river. But, the canopy and everything was still dark. However, there was enough daylight to where we could easily see in the immediate area. So we got ready again. We went over the plan again. Hey, you go first. I'm right behind you. We'll move as one unit. You jump down, cut the line. I'll help our elder because that bank is pretty steep, and he wasn't feeble, but he wasn't spry either. He was mid-late 60s at the time. So plan was down. Looked out the windows, making sure nothing was around. We didn't see anything around. I mean, nothing. It's just dead quiet, dead quiet. Still, remember that the whole time this is going on, that muffled sound, that pressure was constant. It didn't waver in any direction. It was a constant. So
That's
I was like,
that's
let's
so
go.
that's so interesting that was happening. It was like they were projecting this onto you.
And that's what it felt like. It didn't feel natural. It felt like it was being projected. So it was like go time. So we went out the door, and you would have thought we had practiced this for our whole lifetimes because we moved so quickly. We were at the edge of the riverbank. My cousin jumped down, and I started paying attention to helping my elder get his footing. And trust me, I'm rubbernecking. I'm still not seeing anything. So I set the 30-06 down, and I helped my elder get his footing because otherwise he would have tumbled. Um, so once he got his footing and everything, he had a shotgun with him that we had took out the bird shot. It was one of those old Wingmasters, big old behemoth of a 12 gauge, but we had put slugs in it because I had extras for my shotgun, and so we wanted to have every usable gun ready. And I had that slung over my shoulder when we came out. And so when I helped him get his footing, when I got down on one knee, the buttstock kept pushing in the ground and kind of pushing me forward a little bit. And so when he got his footing, I grabbed the 30-06 and I scooted back about 4 to 6 inches when I stood up. And as I got up to full height, this rock, it was a little bigger than a basketball roughly. It whizzed right by my face. Any closer, it would have took the hat off my head, right? And so that's when everything went super slow motion, and I watched this rock impact in the river, and it hit a spot that was about 3 feet deep, a fast-moving river. It hit so hard that it hit the bottom before the water could close over it, and it made this loud-ass sound like a gunshot. And that's when the hearing was back to normal. Still, everything was kind of slow motion, and tunnel vision was just getting really bad. And so immediately I swing to my left because that's the direction that the rock came. And at the tree line, this big black nothing was coming out of it. I have never operated a bolt action rifle so efficiently in my life. I shot it 3 times center mass because I had nothing. I had no defined head to shoot or anything. I just went center mass. And I shot this thing 3 times, and it didn't even buckle or flinch. It stopped moving forward. But we've killed walrus with this thing, man. A 30-06 is not. It's not a small time rifle. It's heavy caliber. I killed everything up here in Alaska with it, outside of a polar bear, and shooting it 3 times center mass, and it stopped moving. Everything within me all of a sudden said, "Run, run, run! Go, go, go!" It was like go time. So I jumped down, and my shotgun was on the landing there, and the line wasn't cut, but the motor was running. So I'm yelling at my cousin, throw me the knife, throw me the knife. He throws the knife, and I go and I cut the rope, and I'm, because of course I set the 30-06 in the bow real quick, and I cut the rope and I'm putting the chain in, and my elder uncle, he was sitting his butt on the edge of the skiff and was slowly going to swing his legs, and I ran over and shoved him in, and he had ended up hurting his wrist or whatever. But I go back to the bow and I'm trying to get the rest of the chain in, and I see my shotgun again, and I make a mental note, I need to grab that. And my cousin, it was idling really high because it was cold, the motor, and he was trying to shift it and it wouldn't shift because it was idling too high. And I said, idle down, idle down. I'm yelling at him about it and stuff. And at this point, my elder had shifted and was facing back towards me. So they're both looking at me, and he idles down. And again, this is all happening way faster than I'm explaining it, but he idles down and it shifts. You hear the clunk, and it almost stalled out, but it didn't. It kept running. And so at that moment, I see them both eyes get big, and they're looking up above behind me. And I glance over my shoulder and I could see the shin basically up to the knee, because again, that tunnel vision was so focused. It was really dark haired, but one thing that stood out was like the tips of the hair. I used to have a rose hair tarantula, so that's what it reminded me of. The color was more of an auburn red on the tips, but not like uh, solid. It was more like a transparent type color. It was real weird, but that stood out in my mind. I push off, I jump in, he backs up, and when I jumped in the skiff, my tunnel vision's hard, man. I got the bolt open on the 30-06. I'm trying to put more bullets in it. I'm looking for the 220 grains because I used 180 grains that didn't seem to work, and it was just kind of chaotic. But I'm staring down, and as we're leaving, we were kind of moving back and forth, and I thought my cousin was trying to break friction to get up on step faster, right? But what I learned later is they were throwing rocks at the motor. One of them cracked the cowling and one of them dented the transom pretty good. But all that was oblivious to me because I was just I was jacked. I was messed up. Uh, it was really bad. But once we got down the river a ways and whatnot, because initially when I looked off to my left, I saw movement along the riverbank just briefly. But again, with that tunnel vision and all the thoughts going through my head, it was messed up. But we got down river a ways and things calmed down. I kept being concerned that they'd push a tree down in our way or something like that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, of
so,
course. Fred, before we go too far on that one, I need to ask a question. When you look back and you saw like the shin of the creature, of the hairy man,
yeah,
how close
yeah.
was it at that point? If you estimated, how close would you say it was to you?
If I would at that where I was standing, if extending my arm, it would have been less than an arm length distance from the tip of my fingers. So
Oh
five
shit.
to seven
Okay.
feet, 5 to 7 feet. It was right there. And, at the time I turned and looked at that big black nothingness coming out of the trees. I had tunnel vision hard, but there was movement on either side of it. I couldn't say for sure what that movement was, but there was movement going on. And one of the things when they were running around, like there was noise when they were running around the shack and all that, and they would back off. There was a bunch of noises they were making at that time. I could not tell you what they were. It was so locked in terror that there was I couldn't even guess. You know what I mean? But there were distinct noises going on. It was just so freaked out that it was all just one jumble of chaotic terror. You know what I mean? Um, once we made to the confluence of the Nuyakuk where it meets up with the Nushagak, um, I felt like I weighed 1,000 pounds. Every part of me hurt just from the tension all night of gripping that gun so hard. And what really broke my heart about the whole thing is up to that point, me and these relatives were like three peas in a pod. every adventure there was to have, us three were at least a core part of it, no matter what. And that was destroyed. Um, and it's unfortunate because I've since lost the elder, and that cousin is not in the best of health right now. So I mean, it literally just it destroyed it because I was telling anyone with a pair of ears, hey, fucking, they try to get us on the Nuyakuk. I was telling everybody. I didn't give a shit about superstition, none of that. It was like, hey, check it out. But there was a lot more superstition and stuff like that going on with at least my elder, and it created a rift because I was telling people who was with me, and they would be like, what, that's crazy, really? And then they go and ask him, and he would either not respond or say, we didn't go there, or he wasn't even with us, what is he talking about, that type of thing, like and a dismissal, and that pissed me off. So I confronted him about it, like, what the fuck, you were right there, and then that created that kind of separation, and then it never got fixed, you know which
That is too
really,
bad. That is too bad. It it really affects. You could tell it really affected. Not only you but everybody else. So, and your elder so much to the point that he wanted to shut it down, and your cousin as well. They just wanted to shut it down and not acknowledge
yeah,
it, and maybe. And I'm not saying that that's what but holding in that kind of thing, can really do a number on you. It
yeah,
holding that in can kill you.
yeah. Because even though I was verbalizing it initially, I just stopped because people were like, "Well, you're lying," because I talked to them and they said such and such, and it was like, I had enough, and you don't want to hear it, whatever. And I myself, I was jacked, man. I was messed up for 4 years after that, man. I it was like I drank a lot more. I had real reckless behavior. Like there was this weird. It's not like a survivor's guilt, but more of a uh, man. I don't even know if there's a word for it, but I was nightmares for a good while, even to this day. Like I was explaining earlier, there's times I could share the story, it doesn't affect me as bad, and other times I share it to where I don't sleep very good for a couple nights because there's certain things I can't do. I can't have at nighttime. I can't have a window next to me with no curtain over it. I just can't. That it's just I won't do that. I can't have a bright white light above me. Um, you know, dog sniffing. I've explained that, but also to this day, I will not have one of those Coleman lanterns around me. That sound of that hiss, I listen to that for hours, and just it's too much because when I was sharing this experience with you, when I was talking about sitting there and with myself for hours, you know, I had every kind of scenario running through my head as far as how they were going to kill me. I could still to this day, I could smell the mossy floor. I could smell the old oil from the drip stove, all of it. It's right there. And the moths hitting the window. I'm glad I don't have a heart condition, man, because every time a moth would hit the window, the moths up here are big, so it's a hard thump, almost like you would expect a finger tap to be. And man, you know,
That that
yeah,
that, that is
it
a what an experience, Fred. What an
yeah.
experience. Like, um, how many of those creatures do you think were actually out there? If you had to make a guess, how many do you think were surrounding you and
I can
and
account for
and
five.
hunting you?
I can account right. I can account for the three sets of eye shine, the one I saw in the window that I shot through the wall, and then that big black nothingness. That I can definitely account for five. And because of the amount of terror and like there's a part of you kind of mentally separates, so when they were running around and we're feeling the impact of them on the ground, the trembling in the earth, it was probably just the five or four. However, when you're so locked in that kind of terror, it could seem like a million. And again, those noises they were making, I wish I was a little more focused at that time to kind of have an idea of what the noises were, but it was just all a part of that goulash of like terror. Like it was just all
Did
encompassing.
Was it anything similar to like the samurai chatter, of like the Sierra
I
sounds or
couldn't
anything like
I
that?
couldn't even tell you. It was just I knew it was happening because the trembling in the ground was you can kind of hear the jiggling of items inside that little shack, our personal items, but that was it as far as noise that made. And then there was other it was a lot of chaos, and I could not I couldn't say if it was that or if it was whooping, or I couldn't tell you. Because at that point, I was on the verge of being under the table wetting my pants. Like, it wasn't I've had people ask me, "Oh, well, you were just protecting your family when you shot through the wall." I was like, "No." When that thing looked at me and that I knew I was food, they didn't even exist at the time. Like, they were there, but for me, it was get off me. It was self-protect, and it was autopilot. I didn't have to consciously go, "Oh, I'm gonna shoot now." It was just it boom, boom, boom. That was it. Um, and of course they came back into focus after, but in that moment, it was me and that thing wanted to eat me. And it was get off me, like back, get off me. Um, One thing that stands out though is the eyelashes, man. When I saw the big black translucent marble looking eyes, uh, those eyelashes were perfectly symmetrical, very thick, very, very lush eyelashes. There's women that would kill for those eyelashes. I don't know why that stands out so vividly for me, but um, and its size I mean, bottom of the nose, top of the eyebrow, in 18-inch space, man. Um, yeah, and that look was just so final. It was finite. It was I got you, and it was like, yeah, yeah, man. It was definitely rough.
Wow, I would never ever want to be in that position, and it's terrifying that you were. Um, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say, Fred, other than I'm glad that you made it out, and that you weren't
Right.
food, not
Yeah.
no, not
Yeah.
you weren't going to allow that, and it's good that you had a good head on your shoulders to orchestrate this, escape, with you and your elder and your cousin, that you were able to, to facilitate that, and to kind of like lay out this plan of what you're going to do. What about your gun? Did that get left on the shore,
It
or
got
what
left
happened?
there once, because it was so chaotic. Mentally, I was like, "Don't forget that," because I spent a good chunk of change getting that thing in a remote village. Up here, everything's a premium regardless, but this was custom made. But yeah, it was left there on the riverbank, but which is no big deal, But I never got a solid answer on why it was there. I think what happened was he was so freaked out when he got down on the landing, he just dropped it and focused on firing up the motor. And I can't begrudge that. I get it. Um, yeah, and that there's a lot of unanswered questions from that. Why didn't they break it down? Why didn't they snatch us out of there? And if they weren't trying to get us, see, when I stood up, I I scooted back 4 to 6 inches. That rock had to have already been on its way when I stood up from that
Okay, yeah,
distance.
yeah.
So I firmly believe, had I just stood up where I was at, they were anticipating where I was going to be, and I scooted back and stood up, and it just barely missed my face. Uh, they were aiming to take me out. And I didn't learn until years later about them throwing rocks at the outboard and whatnot. And it's oof, oof. Forgive me, I'm getting over this head cold, and every once in a while it's just pain in the butt.
Not not a problem, not a problem, Fred, at all. And like, do you feel that they're just not allowed in? Is it some sort of like they are not allowed to enter into someone's abode? Disregard
Right,
tents beside the way, but it's kind of like, like they have
can't
to be
cross the
invited in
threshold.
almost. Exactly.
Right. So
Exactly.
the only the only time I've heard of encounters happening where, excuse me, but the only time I've heard of them coming in was when the door was open. So I, what I feel is there's probably I think they're ancient beings, right? So, and I'll just leave it at that for now. But I think there's unwritten rules or things they have to go by that we were probably familiar with in days past. However, because we live in a modern age and more comfortable, we no longer retain that. You know what I mean? If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And this kind of lends credence to, like, when we're talking like vampires and everything like that, they're not allowed in unless they're invited in, like
Right,
these
unless they're invited,
mythological
and
or
like
the yeah.
black-eyed kids too. Invite us in. That's another thing. So, I mean, in essence, I think a lot of these things that people consider folklore or whatever, I think they're all related in different ways, or they're different things related in very uh, direct ways. Like being invited in or not being able to cross a threshold, that kind of stuff. And we may never know, but that's what makes sense to me. Because, and also another aspect that just kind of keeps kicking back in my mind is a lot of these encounters where they don't break in. It's like every time the person is calming down, they re-engage to spike that terror, and it's like a negative energy thing. It almost like they're feeding off that negative vibe, that like they get off on it or something, because nothing else makes sense when they could easily end it by getting in. Yeah, just so many unanswered questions, man. So many, so many. Yeah,
I agree. And like, I gotta bring up this thing. I say this often. It's like, I often wonder if, when you have the welcome mat on the front of your
right.
house, I wonder if that is an actual invitation, that it's like, well, you're welcoming in, that is you allowing me to come in, because the intention is there with that mat.
Right,
It is.
right. And
I've
it,
always
it
thought
almost
about that.
reminds me of like what they call sigil magic, where it's done in front of you. It's something that's like passive, but if you don't argue against it, it's allowable. You see what I mean?
Yes, I
Uh,
know exactly what you mean.
yeah. So again, so many unanswered questions. So much speculation and so much intrigue. But you know, going back to the reason I started the channel was because of one, that experience I just shared with you, and another aspect was I was hearing all these encounters that were like forest friend, let's weave a basket, let's pick berries together. Which, hey, if that happens, so be it. However, from my experience up here in Alaska, which again I recognize is a totally different animal compared to the States, but I was hearing these what I call fanciful type of things, because my experience and the other ones I've heard, that even if the person didn't see it, they felt dread. They felt in fear of their life, and they didn't even see this thing. They just sensed it and was like, I feel like I'm going to die. I got to go. Like, my friends don't make me feel like that. You know what I mean? Uh, and I've never heard of an encounter, even when a guy shared his experience where a female saved him. I asked him, that's cool. I've never heard that. How to feel? What was your feelings about it in the moment? He was like, I felt like they wanted to get rid of the pest because of the search and rescue going on. And he said what he felt and picked up from the whole experience was that they were getting rid of the problem. And so, because initially I was like, I've never heard a good Sasquatch story, but, his, and even he said, I felt like they were just trying to get rid of the problem, versus something nurturing and, oh, here, I'll save you, poor little hairless, whatever. But, so many unanswered questions, and that's another thing I don't do on my channel. I stick to the traditional, the oral tradition of just sharing what happened to who, where, and the circumstances, and I leave it at that. Versus like me and you going back and forth with,
Yeah,
ideas and
having a
theories and
discussion, and yeah,
speculation. Yeah, I leave that out because that's not in line with the oral tradition. You see what I mean?
yeah. I
So
do, I
that's
do completely. Yeah, and it like, and in all honesty, this is all it is. Like, this discussion is just speculation, because if someone's claiming they're an expert, it's, well, no, I don't think you
that
are.
that's
It's
a
like,
load of
there's
shit. Yeah, there is no experts. People have asked, like I've been contacted by production companies and they ask me, well, we want you to be our expert. I was like, no, don't put that on me. I don't want that. No, because no one's an expert, until there's that Jane Goodall moment where gorillas in the mist type of shit. That ain't happening. We don't know nothing, you know?
Yeah, that's exactly it. We don't know nothing, and everybody's coming forward, and they're like, "No, this is what it is. This is what this type of creature is. This is what it is." We
Right.
don't know. Like the stories, like your natives, like your oral traditions that are passed down, are some of the better stories. The better advice to keep us safe. But in the
Right.
end, it's like we're only documenting and taking down these anecdotal stories, but
Yeah.
that's all it is
Yeah.
right now.
From
It's
someone's
like
experience. Yeah. I
yes,
know exactly what you mean. And grant you, the fact that it is part of the oral tradition kind of it lends more weight to it. But no matter what, naysayers, if they're dead set on being a naysayer, then that's not going to change anything. I have people that will come at me with, "Where's the evidence?" And it's like, you know what? There's so much. I know there's a lot of hokey, bull out there that muddies the waters. However, there's legitimate evidentiary footage, sounds, all of it. If you're not willing to accept what's already there, no matter what I bring to the table, you won't accept that either. So don't question me about evidence. That's to me, there's enough out there that those claiming to want evidence, there's enough there. So what do it's like a willful ignorance, and that cognitive dissonance of I'm too smart to have been fooled and lied to. Our government wouldn't lie to us. We
oh
would know if they
no,
were.
oh no.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I
our
feel.
government has only lied to us for the past couple hundred of years, but they've changed now. They're telling the truth now. Yeah,
Yeah, they're our forest friends. They want to teach us to weave baskets and pick berries. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I'll
I'll
I'll,
just leave
I'll
them a
go
jar of
along with
peanut
that.
butter, and we'll be all good.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah,
But
uh,
yeah, it's just amazing to me,
it is, and
just how much
I
is dismissed.
and Fred, I want to bring up one last thing, before we come to an end here. Is I've had this theory. Sometimes when like I've heard a lot in like the lower states where they'll slap houses. They'll run by and slap a house. Okay,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I'm tying this into a native tradition of counting coup. It's kind of like I've upped you. Like, look I've come into your camp, I've slapped your house, and I've showed you that I'm the better warrior. That I've invaded your
right.
area and I've ran off.
And I have the same view. And I'm glad you mentioned it because it's not something I talk about on a regular basis. Because again, on the channel, it's just cut and dry. Um, but that makes sense to me because uh, a lot of people want to consider him some kind of ancient hominid ape, and that's not it. What I saw looked more like a Neanderthal versus anything else. Just a caveman with different colored skin, and that would make sense as far as counting coup, uh, just due to the fact that just about every tribe around had a form of that or another, and uh, and you know, again, speculation, but that makes more sense than most other types of theories. You know what I mean? And sometimes I think the slap could just be outright harassment. Because a lot of times up here, if there's a slap involved, it's a precursor to something going bad or it's part of something going bad. Whether they're walking around the place, banging here and there, looking in windows. And that's another thing. They don't break windows when they could easily break windows. You know, they wave at children. They try to tempt children to come out and play. They can put women in trances. There was a lady that experienced a trance, and she was about 22 when she shared it with me. But they were on a four wheeler trail, and this four wheeler trail was only one trail, and everyone knew to stay on it because it was their berry patch. They didn't want a bunch of tearing up the berries, and so they were checking to see if the berries were getting ready for putting in effort to pick. And she said that it was like a big horseshoe, and she said about at the apex of it, all of a sudden they looked around. There was berries weren't ready, and they were getting ready to continue. And all of a sudden, this hairy man was about 50 feet away. And initially, her thoughts were she felt like, oh, that's my grandpa. She felt a warm, welcoming feeling. And so she turned the four-wheeler to go off trail. Well, in the course of doing that, she bumped and banged her knee, and it snapped her out of that trance, and she saw it for what it was and took off out of there. Um, but there's some things that, they seem to be capable of that is just outright uh, terrifying and very cunning. Like I've accounts from my elders. There's one of my female elders. She's in her 80s now. Back in 67 or 69, this thing imitated a known baby. A baby. One of the neighbors had a baby that was real calicky, newborn, and always had this familiar cry. And so they heard that familiar cry inside their little place, and it drew them out to go help the baby. It was this thing imitating it. That level of cunning is not just happenstance. That is top level predator cunning, and it's really scary, because if things were to go a different direction and they just said, "Screw all these, hairless beings. Let's kill them all." There's not much that of a defense outside of heavy caliber type stuff, but it's really intriguing stuff. Um,
No, it is. I agree with you. It is intriguing. As scary as it is intriguing as well because it's this mystery that we truly don't have all the information on it. We have like these fragments, and you're doing a fantastic job by piecing them all together and compiling them and putting them in one spot, which is fantastic. And get, one last time, can you tell everybody where that is? Like where your YouTube channel and your website as well?
Oh, yeah. It's Subarctic Alaska Sasquatch.com. And remember, Arctic is spelled Arctic. Uh,
It's true.
and
Everybody skips that first C. Everybody skips that
yeah,
first C.
I've done it a few times myself, even though I know better. So it's not a knock on anyone. And the website is the same, just .com, and that's where you can find the interactive map. And my tech guy should be getting the photos that are worthy of having up. Some are just scenery photos from locations we've been, and others are of submitted photos from people. And yeah, that most definitely.
Fred, I want to say thank you so much for giving us your time here. It's your story was very um, emotional and disturbing and frightening all at the same time, and I'm glad that you made it out. And it's really it's pushed you, in my opinion, it's pushed you to to be this gatherer of all these stories, this collector of these stories now, and now you're the story bearer. You are the one that's continuing this tradition,
Right.
and you're and I applaud that. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, definitely. And thanks for having me on. And uh, I'll let you close out your show. I'll wait in the in the back room
In the
or
green room
whatever.
there.
So, yeah, in the green
Perfect.
room, so your recording can finish. But hey, thanks for having me on, and we'll do this again, so we can exchange more outside of just my own personal stuff. I have a lot more that we could share at some
I, I
point.
I would love to hear that. I would love to hear that, Fred. Thank you so much again for your time.
Yeah, most definitely. Thanks a lot.
Everyone, that was Fred Roehl with could be one of the most terrifying Bigfoot encounters that I've ever personally heard. Like I've heard numerous other ones, but that one itself, maybe Martin Groves actually has his, but his was I'm not going to say his was a dogman and Bigfoot encounter, but um, terrifying. You are food. You are my prey, and but there is something to be said about staying within your building. And not they're not crossing that threshold. Just a J hook, if you know what that is. It's just a little latch. It's nothing. But they would not enter. So don't get drawn out. Don't don't fall for their tricks. Don't fall for their conniving. And I just pray that everybody stays safe out there, especially in Alaska. It sounds like it's a dangerous place. Not only just the regular wildlife and the environment and the harshness of the winters and everything, but you have these you have these Bigfoot out there, these hairy men, and they're hunting. They're hungry. And with that, I want everybody to keep your curiosity wandering, keep the light lit, and always find your way home.
Beneath the stars where shadows grow, the Nephilim's echoes whisper low. Bigfoot roams through the forest deep, and Dogman prowls where the brave won't sleep. Across lost history we wonder why, seeking the truth that time tried to hide. Keep your curiosities wandering and the light lit, through the darkness don't ever quit. In the Codex, the mysteries come, and always find your way back home. UFOs streak through the velvet skies, aliens watch with unblinking eyes. The paranormal hums where silence breaks, in the void of secrets a lantern wakes. Through hidden realms and stories untold, the Codex flame is the light to hold. Keep your curiosities wandering and the light lit, through the darkness don't ever quit. In the Codex, the mysteries come, and always find your way back home. UFOs streak through the velvet skies, aliens watch with unblinking eyes. The paranormal hums where silence breaks, in the void of secrets a lantern wakes. Through hidden realms and stories untold, the Codex flame is a light to hold. Keep your curiosities wandering and the light lit, through the darkness don't ever quit. In the Codex, the mysteries come, and always find your way back home. Legends rise from the Earth's deep core, a lost legacy we can't ignore. With every step, the veil grows thin, revealing worlds where the strange begins. Keep your curiosities wandering and the light lit, through the darkness don't ever quit. In the Codex, the mysteries come, and always find your way back